All right, good evening, everyone. So, welcome to another episode of the J. Scott Ascension, where we discuss everything from current events to health and nutrition, politics, religion, and ancient history. Today, I have two extremely special guests on my show, Dr. McCullough and Professor Tim Canova, who will be joining us in just a moment, who have detailed their extensive and influential backgrounds on former podcasts on this channel, which I really encourage you to go back and watch. Dr. McCullough has been one of the most courageous members of the medical community during this pandemic, discovering and advocating for the effective early outpatient treatment that could have saved a tremendous amount of lives had his advice been followed early on. He is an internist, a cardiologist, epidemiologist, managing the cardiovascular complications of both the viral infection and injuries developing after the COVID-19 vaccine in Dallas, Texas. Notably, he is also the active president of the Cardiorenal Society of America and the most published doctor in history in his field of the cardiorenal connection. Tim is a former congressional candidate for Florida, where he took on one of the most influential establishment Democrats, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. The first time he ran against her, she was head of the DNC at the time and had recently made headlines for abusing her authority to prevent Bernie Sanders from winning the 2016 Democratic nomination for president. He ran against her twice. Both times had huge irregularities. And in my opinion, his story serves as the most obvious case of election fraud in history. Now he is currently a law professor at a major university in South Florida. In both of my eyes, both of these men are respective heroes in their fights. And today I have the honor of hosting a conversation between both of them on a cause we're all advocating for: bodily autonomy and preserving the sanctity of the doctor-patient relationship. Those who oppose mandatory vaccination are sometimes not allowed to speak freely on the topic, even if they are amongst the most talented in their field, as was recently exemplified by the removal of Dr. Malone, of the inventor of mRNA technology, from Twitter. So this video will be uploaded to both Rumble and YouTube. However, we will not be deterred by authoritarian attempts to convert science into an unquestionable religion through the killing of free speech, silencing attempts to convert science into through killing free speech and dissent, because both democracy and human rights cannot exist without it. My apologies. I think Tim is actually having a little trouble logging in. Give me 1 second. So Tim is logging in right now. So with that being said, I know you're very pressed for time, so let's jump right into it. So Dr. McCullough, on your recent Joe Rogan interview, you touched on a few topics which I'd like to discuss further. So to start things out, could you please explain in more detail what's meant by the term mass psychosis?
The term mass psychosis, and it's actually the official term is mass formation, and then in parentheses is mass psychosis.
That's what I meant to say, sorry.
Yeah, it's a term that applies to a process where human beings develop a strong group thinking, all thinking in the same way. And that thinking ultimately leads to a series of events that are really considered catastrophic. And so the elements of mass formation, as proposed by Dr. Matthias Desmet from the University of Ghent in Belgium, are as follows: that for this group, they would have to be isolated for a period of time. The second part is for the group, they'd have to have things taken away from them that they used to enjoy. The third criteria is that there has to be constant free-floating anxiety over the group. And then the last is that there must be a solution provided by a entity of authority. And the way you know it's a mass formation is when the solution takes on a characteristic of absurdity or ludicrous. And so the example would be a religious cult where they become so feverish about a particular notion and they ultimately commit mass suicide. They actually kill themselves. Or in Nazi Germany, there was such a fervor for Nazi greatness and ethnic cleansing that they actually perform eugenics and actually do try to cleanse part of the population. And they co-opt in these cases, they co-opt the doctors. The doctors are big agents in mass formation. And so here we are today with this idea, we've had COVID-19, we fulfilled all 4 criteria. The question is, do we have things going on that we would consider absurd? Is there absurdity? Are there examples? Can you think of examples, Jay or Tim, where there is absurdity, and have us confirm that we're in mass formation?
Yes, definitely. And thank you so much for joining us. I know there was a bit of confusion with the invite, so sorry about that, Tim. But yes, welcome.
Great to be with you. And Dr. McCullough, have so much respect for everything you've been doing night and day.
Yes, thank you. And to your point before, I definitely want to apologize and correct myself for getting that term wrong, mass psychosis, because I actually just watched the interview with you, Dr. Malone, and Dr. Matthias that I believe went live 2 days ago. And my whole point was we have to start changing it to mass formation, which is his original definition, because the language is going to turn people off, if we describe it, in the wrong way. But your point about us being disconnected from the data, I think is what, and doing it in mass that would be one of the things that really helps us identify that we're in mass psychosis, because we're making big decisions that doesn't seem to be based on the overall data. Would you say that's the biggest sign?
But that's a subtlety. But I was really trying to get you or Tim to kind of bubble up is the idea of absurdity. So for instance, you could think of someone wearing a mask in a swimming pool and swimming with a mask on, right? So that would be absurd. You could think of people wearing a mask in a car by themselves. That would be absurd. Or, then you keep taking more and more serious examples, like, a deadly respiratory illness that the group prohibits any treatment for until it's too late, and then they're in the hospital and they can't be saved. I mean, that's really sadly absurd. Or how about a vaccine that doesn't work to stop COVID, but yet employers pit everything on someone's employment on a vaccine, which all experts and regulatory agencies agree does not stop the spread of the virus. And the only reason to have a vaccine in the workplace would be to stop the spread of the virus. So you can see these examples of absurdity. So what Malone and Desmond have said, and Mark McDonald in his book, The United States of Fear, he's a psychiatrist in LA, they all agree we're actually in mass formation.
Yes.
I find it rather absurd that people are getting double vaxxed and then boosted, and they're coming down with a COVID variant. That should suggest there's maybe some lack of efficacy in the vaccines themselves, but then they turn around and they're blaming the unvaccinated for this latest Omicron variant that has been spreading far and wide.
Or Tim, how about that scenario, but get another booster? So that's what's going on in Israel. In Israel, they're on their 3rd or 4th booster. They keep getting COVID, and then they keep taking boosters. I mean, that that's absurd. There's a vignette of a man who gets admitted to a hospital with COVID, and they treat him by actually giving him a vaccine.
Exactly.
So I mean, so there is. I think there's lots of examples of absurdity or some things that are ludicrous. And the biggest part of the whole news cycle, as you know, I'm a frequent commentator on Fox News and Newsmax, whatever, is really just this idea that things don't make sense. It doesn't add up. And so, all these things, we do randomized trials of masks. We do detailed studies of masks. The conclusion is masks don't work for very common sense reasons. Like, lead engineer Stephen Petty, who's done a lot of work on masks, 18% of the air goes around the mask. Like, everyone would agree, you can see air around the mask.
Exactly.
And then the virus is smaller than the pores of a mask. Everyone agrees on that. So what's the solution? Everybody must wear a mask. So you can see the absurdity of it. I think we're in mass formation. And what Gaius again says is that the large group of people are typically in the formation, and then there's a smaller group that are not participating in the formation. And one of the things that happen is the larger group actually really pounds on the small group. The small group, in a sense, starts to become the recipient of all different types of behaviors that are untoward towards the small group.
Exactly. And the absurdity just escalates as before you hit that breaking point, the absurdity continues to escalate. That's, how it seems it's been going, over the past few years. And it's perfectly obvious when you consider how the story has changed, because when the vaccine was first announced, we were all promised, it would be at most once a year. That's what it was sounding like. It would be you do like at most once a year. And then all of a sudden that changed to 6 months. And then all of a sudden it changed to 2 months. And then now, like you pointed out, they're on their 4th or 5th in Israel. So with that being said, I'm going to have links, to data in the description of this video. So I'd encourage everyone to go look at the data themselves. And Tim, could you actually share your opinion on the most effective ways that we can all go about protecting our democracy from the effects of mass psychosis?
Well, I was just about
mass formation. I need to stop
formation.
that. Mass formation. Sorry.
I was just about to ask Dr. McCullough a question, which is, how do we get out of this mass formation? I'm somebody who teaches First Amendment law and have been studying the mass media for a long time. And before I heard Dr. McCullough and Dr. Malone speaking about mass formation, I was referring it to this phenomenon in somewhat different but similar terms. I was saying that my friends, our loved ones who are falling for these mainstream narratives are victims of a mass propaganda campaign. And what's so insidious about it is that the propaganda is repeated over and over again on so many different platforms that it has the appearance to many people of the truth, because it's being repeated by so many different outlets. How could this be some kind of coordinated lie? And when you try to point out that 90% of our media outlets now, 90% of our broadcast, TV, radio, and print media are pretty much controlled now by 5 enormous corporate conglomerates, it doesn't register with a lot of people. It sounds like, this is just too fantastic to be true. You're describing some far-fledged conspiracy that can't be accurate. And yet those are the numbers at this point, that 5 conglomerates control 90% of the media. And these are corporate conglomerates, which really means the governance is very much top down. And if you're working for one of these big media outlets and you don't go along with their narrative, you're not going to be maintaining your job very long. And, I often point to the experience at MSNBC of the kind of purges they've had over the years. They fired Phil Donahue when Donahue had the highest rated cable talk show because Donahue had come out against the war in Iraq. They fired Ed Schultz, who had a very popular talk show, because Schultz was covering the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2016. So these are top-down entities, and the anchors, the reporters, if they want to continue to receive a very sizable salary, they've really got to go along with the script.
Yep, those are all, excellent points. And I don't know if you guys have been seeing the mashups that have been going around on social media of the Brought to You by Pfizer, like videos, and they bring you different clips of intros to news sections that straight up say Brought to You by Pfizer. So those are all good points. But yes, Dr. McCullough, do you have any comments on your opinion on the best way to kind of break this mass formation?
Yeah, I've had a chance to ask Matthias Dent, and he's volunteered it in several seminars. And by the way, I think Malone did a great job on Rogan. How this worked out is that Brett Weinstein, who's an evolutionary biologist, and Pierre Corey initially appeared on Rogan a few months ago, and they largely went over the epidemic and focused on ivermectin. Then Rogan gets COVID. He gets monoclonal antibodies, ivermectin, prednisone, the drugs in combination, which is now called the McCullough protocol. It's copyrighted because I was the first one to publish that and put it together. Many have contributed. So he gets the McCullough protocol. He gets roundly criticized. The FDA starts a campaign saying that ivermectin is a horse dewormer, and so does the NIH. The American Medical Association in September launches a campaign to abolish the use of ivermectin, And here we are in the middle of a pandemic, and this is a drug that doctors have found valuable. And so the AMA wants to abolish it. And then Sanjay Gupta comes on and says that it's only a horsey rumor with no evidence. So Rogan brings Sanjay Gupta on and basically schools him on ivermectin in his studio in Austin. And then Rogan wants to bring me on, and I'm busy. I can't get down there. And so I finally get down to Austin, and I spend, I go 15 rounds with Rogan in the man cave, and I kind of lay out really what I laid out to Tucker Carlson 6 months ago. It's no different. That there has been a very intentional suppression of treatment in order to prepare and then promote the mass vaccination of everybody over and over again. I think it's all pretty well connected. Yeah, and I think Rogan was kind of blown away, and then he said, "I want to bring you back on." I said, "Listen, bring on someone else. I'm a doctor. I'm a practicing doctor. I just finished at the hospital before I came on here. I'm taking care of patients. I have a different perspective. Bring him alone. He's not a practicing doctor. He is a preclinical scientist, but he really knows the vaccines very well, and he's also trained in bioethics, and that's the reason why they went into this." And Malone spent time with Matthias Desmet. Malone and Desmet, myself, and podcaster Tommy Kerrigan just circled back for our get together on this. And I tell you, Desmet is invaluable. This guy is terrific. I felt like I was in graduate school listening to a brilliant professor, and he went through all of this. Of course, people want to get to the bottom line. How do we snap our fingers and make this go away? Well, the first thing is it just doesn't go away quickly. There's some type of mental imprinting that's going on. It's almost like a mental contagion. It's all over the world, and it's at the same time. And it can't be about Pfizer, because in South America, the vaccine of focal point is Sinovac by Coronavac. So it can't be about money with Moderna, what have you, because it's too many different vaccines in too many different places, but it's all the same behavior at the same time. But what he says is that the small group, obviously has to win in the end. And they win by, continued resistance, by non-violent forms of resistance and communication, and then keep working at relatedness, trying to find an object of relatedness. And we've used some different examples. So if you've noticed, Aaron Rodgers is kind of bringing my name up in some podcasts, and Rogan's talking to Rodgers and back and forth. And now Dan Ball had me on the other day commenting on, because we're trying to get some relatedness to something people could relate to, like Aaron Rodgers, who decides not to take the vaccine, and he gets COVID and he's adequately treated and he's fine. We're going to try to pick some of these happy examples in order to move forward. What I hope the relatedness is not is some mega celebrity going down with the vaccine death. The day that Tom Brady goes down, or Oprah Winfrey, or a head of state or something, and it's clear cut. I hope it doesn't come to that. But what Matthias Desmet says, unfortunately, most examples of mass formation do end in a massive loss of life. And we've already had such a great loss of life with the respiratory illness and now with the vaccines.
Robert Kennedy's Defender publication just today has a very interesting piece, which kind of goes to what you were saying. He's taking on Jake Tapper, CNN's shrill condemnation of Robert Kennedy. And in the course of it, comes along to the story of Hank Aaron, one of the great home run kings of all time, who I guess Robert Kennedy had suggested his death may have been a result of a vaccine injury. And Tapper, then went on the air and said that the coroner denied that. And the fact was the coroner never even saw Hank Aaron's body, did no autopsy on his body, made no opinion on it whatsoever. So Tapper had just basically made and the facts remain that Hank Aaron had done a press conference, I think, for the CDC when he got vaccinated, and 17 days later he was dead. Now, I'm not claiming that Hank Aaron was killed by the vaccine. We don't really know. That's the point. There's a lot of correlation. It doesn't necessarily mean there's causation, but you cannot even speculate. You cannot even ask the question without the smear. And that's what I find interesting about this mass formation when you talk about the four elements of it. The final element is to basically smear, dismiss, attack anyone who questions the narrative.
Now, Tim, from a regulatory perspective, I've done a tremendous amount of work on data safety monitoring boards, critical event committees. I've worked with big pharma, in vitro diagnostics, NIH. When we give an investigational product like a vaccine, which Hank Aaron received, and he dies 17 days later, it doesn't matter. Causality doesn't matter. It doesn't. It's simply the fact that it happens, that it raises concern, and it raises the need for investigation.
Guilty until proven innocent. In
drug research,
trial, right?
Actually, Jay, you're right. In drug research, basically what the regulatory practice is that if you can't explain it outside of anything else, listen, I've chaired some data safety monitoring boards with some dangerous medications, and what the FDA has told me, they said, listen, you get 5 unexplained events, this drug is gone. You're gone. And I've literally had to make a call on some of these data safety monitoring boards. So this idea that, we have to prove causality, no, we don't. It's the fact that it happened, and it happened in close temporal relationship. We have analyses from McLachlan and Rose showing in the vaccine adverse event reporting system, half of these deaths occur within 48 hours, 80% occur within a week. We've never had such an exquisite relationship, temporal relationship between giving a medicinal agent and death. McLachlan analysis coding the vignettes to independent reviewers, trying to assign causality from what they can read. We now know that 86% of these deaths have no other explanation. And now a breaking news has just come out on Twitter. Lead attorney Aaron Siri has won a victory against Pfizer and the FDA. Remember, the FDA wanted to shield Pfizer on releasing their regulatory dossier for 55 years. The FDA was trying to shield Pfizer. The judges come in, is now granted large numbers of components of the dossier to come out each month to an independent review panel of public health professionals. I'm one of them. In fact, I've been named the captain, and I can tell you, we are going to look carefully at what's called the PSYOMS reports, and that is what were people reporting firsthand, Pfizer, when individuals were dying after the vaccine. The initial bundle that was leaked from Pfizer knew about thousands of these deaths.
Wow. That's really great news to hear that you're actually going to be part of the official review panel for these, because honestly, you've been on the front lines, from the beginning of this pandemic with developing the protocol that's been used to help treat people. And you've been one of the most outspoken people who could not be described as an anti-vaxxer or a conspiracy theorist in any sense of the word. All you're doing is talking about data. I've watched everything from your Alex Jones interviews to your Joe Rogan interviews to your interviews on AmericaOutloud.com, where you're speaking about it. So I see the facts that you're speaking about. And whenever people criticize you, they never actually talk about the data that you're describing. All they do is they find some way to attack you, and they say, oh, he's being sued by somebody. I don't even know what the full story is there. So at the end of the day, I'm really excited to hear that you're a part of the review panel, and thank you so much for sharing that news. But I'm really glad that you brought up that point, because that's a perfect transition to the next question that I have for you. And Tim, I have some more questions coming up for you too. So, but yes, Dr. McCullough, in your Joe Rogan interview, you mentioned that the lipid nanoparticles used in the vaccines may be dangerous. Now, not only is mRNA technology used in these vaccines still new and largely untested on a mass scale, but to the best of my knowledge, this is also the first time we've used lipid nanoparticles, the lipid nanoparticles you mentioned in a vaccine. So as a cardiologist who's treated patients that have taken the vaccine, can you share more about the short and long-term damage that you believe the lipid nanoparticles may be causing and why they're potentially dangerous?
it's hard to sort out toxicity from the lipid nanoparticles from the messenger RNA itself. So let's just take the particles first. So Pfizer and Moderna use lipid nanoparticles that have a preservative called PEG, or polyethylene glycol. And it is known in the literature that 75% of us have some sensitivity to polyethylene glycol. And it's just a matter of who has more sensitivity. Since there have been so many deaths that have occurred right in the vaccine center or shortly thereafter. I had a patient tell me a vignette of a relative who took the vaccine and basically died in a car ride home. That's how some of these deaths occur. I infer that some of these relatively immediate deaths occur due to a polyethylene glycol allergy. Now, in a young person like you, you could have an allergic reaction and have a reduction in blood pressure and swelling in your face and neck, and you could survive it. But I can tell you, I see patients who are vulnerable. They have heart and lung disease. They have other neurodegenerative diseases. I mean, they're frail to begin with. Their body couldn't sustain a vigorous allergic reaction to polyethylene glycol. So, I think that is the immediate toxicity for the lipid nanoparticle with Pfizer and Moderna comes up. In Dallas, lead internist Al Johnson has actually come up with a way of testing the degree of sensitivity to polyethylene glycol, and a lot of patients are seeing him. Now, with Johnson & Johnson and with AstraZeneca, the preservative is called polysorbate 80, and that also has its own family of allergic reactions. The body doesn't tolerate these lipid nanoparticles very well. And then the final thing I'd say about the lipid nanoparticles is it's disturbing where they go in the body. Pfizer had conducted a biodistribution study in animals of just the lipid nanoparticles alone, not the messenger RNA, and demonstrated that they do concentrate in lipophilic organs that are actually designed to produce steroid hormones. And that would be the adrenal glands and the ovaries of the animals. In fact, they wash out of the adrenals pretty quickly, as they do with all tissues, but they hyperconcentrate in the ovaries. And in a 2018 paper from China, there's actually a wonderful figure that I've shown where they demonstrated that, in fact, they knew the lipid nanoparticles would hyperconcentrate in the ovaries. In fact, the corpus luteum phase of the ovaries. So there's a great concern that the lipid nanoparticles do give a distribution to the human ovaries, that there's an installation of the genetic material that codes for the Wuhan spike protein, and the spike protein is dangerous. It incites local tissue damage, inflammation, and then breaks free and floats throughout the body in the bloodstream. But the fact that the ovaries are a beachhead, and that's where the installation of the spike protein occurs, is really concerning.
Yep, I agree 100%. And in fact, if you look at the data that was released to the government of Japan, early on from Pfizer, I believe it was also showing the lymph nodes were second. So if you think about it, it could be affecting our reproductive systems and our immune systems. Those could be some of the first systems impacted. And the polyethylene glycol, I remember when I first read about it, I did a little bit of research, and I realized that's the part that allows the vaccine to actually penetrate the brain and the blood-brain barrier and other parts of the body, which is why this is reacting differently in our body. One of the reasons why it could be causing so much more effects than other vaccines we've had in the past. So these effects you've mentioned, the reason I'm asking about it is I personally have friends, who've taken the vaccine and they've had one or two health issues, come up since then, including, reactivation of stuff, that had happened in the past. And they're all being told it's unrelated to the vaccine, to their doctors. So, I'd be interested to see what the legal, obviously, Pfizer and all the drug companies are protected from being sued, but it's just, I don't know, it's just really, disturbing seeing everyone still denying the possibility of these things being linked to the vaccine. So,
Jay, can I jump in? I recently met a young woman who was double vaxxed and only 2-3 weeks later was diagnosed with lupus.
Wow.
I have no idea if the lupus is a result of that. Maybe the doctor has an opinion, but what was interesting, I thought, was it didn't even cross her mind that it could be related. But I have a follow-up question to the doctor, which is, I've read that 90% of the vaccine injuries are being caused by, or so far were caused by something like only 5% of the batches. I wonder if you've looked into that at all.
I haven't looked into it, and that's going to be a critical part of the Pfizer dossier, is to be the first time we can actually link up SIAM's reports to exactly what batch was received. So we'll have the lot number, and we'll be able to get down to that level of granularity. From the VAERS system, we enter in the manufacturer and the lot numbers, but that's done basically on a goodwill basis. We'd like to see the regulatory dossier, because Pfizer is airtight. They will be airtight. We'll know on every single safety form exactly what they received, and we should be able to match it up. It's going to take some work. I have a hard time believing that it's just bad batches, because the mechanism of the injury is consistent with what the vaccines do. So for instance, the vaccines install genetic material that produce the spike protein. And as you pointed out, Jay, the vaccines do travel to the brain. So we see spike protein in the brain in individuals who have had an autopsy. We know that the spike protein is measurable in the plasma, easily for 2 weeks and even up to a month afterwards. The spike protein has been shown to cause damage to the heart. A paper by Avolio and colleagues have shown this. The spike protein itself damages endothelial cells and causes blood clotting. There's a series of papers by Zhang and colleagues. I'm a co-author. So I have a hard time believing it's just a batch. What may happen is there may be certain batches or certain patients where there's either excess concentration of the material, or it's the way it's distributed, taken up, that creates a severe syndrome in one person and no side effects at all in the next one.
Is there some percentage of these vaccines that are placebo or reduced dosages? Would that be typical?
No, and it's not indicated on the consent form. Remember, the vaccines are all in research. So if they're giving placebos or giving reduced doses, there should be randomization or some type of allocation, and then people must be informed in the consent form. We have the Declaration of Helsinki that tells research subjects they must be informed on what's going on.
Interesting.
Okay. Now, that's actually a perfect segue into the next question, because I think now we're establishing that it's clear we don't have a good understanding of what the implications of the vaccine will be on public health. So with that being said, Tim, would you say that this is exactly the kind of scenario that the Nuremberg Code was written to prevent? And I think it's important to remember that all these governments that are implementing these mandates across the world, they've all signed on to the Nuremberg Code. So would you say that we have a strong case for saying that the Nuremberg Code has been violated by, the actions of governments and a lot of companies across the world?
I'm personally concerned about the liability under the Nuremberg Code. As you correctly point out, it's been codified in U.S. law. It's been adopted by the International Covenant on Political and Civil Rights that was adopted by the United Nations and ratified by the U.S. Senate decades ago. And as I said, codified under federal statute and rules and regulations and medical ethics. And Nuremberg does state quite simply that any medication should require informed consent, and that includes experimental medicines. And by informed consent, they mean free, uncoerced consent. It concerns me that so much of the possible adverse side effects are being censored. When we watch cable TV at night and we see all these drug commercials for whatever ailments there might be, I mean, it's almost comical sometimes when they list out the possible adverse side effects. Now, the vaccine,
really fast.
That's right. And the vaccines are not being advertised, so they don't have to disclose the possible adverse side effects. But in a way, they're being advertised by our political leaders, the leaders of our corporations and universities, and you name it. And nobody's disclosing the adverse side effects. If you try to disclose it or have a discussion about it on social media, you're in danger of it being censored, or certainly of there being some kind of a tag put up by Facebook, for instance, that they should refer to the COVID-19 pages of the CDC. So you have a media system that is cutting off the information. When millions of people don't have sufficient information as a result, how are they obtaining informed consent? They're really not. So it's very systematic deprivation of the rights of individuals to be informed and to give their informed consent.
Exactly. Good point. Your thoughts on that, Dr. McCullough?
It's true. I think the Nuremberg Code, which says no one under any circumstances can receive any pressure, coercion, or threat of reprisal for taking or not taking something into their body. And then the Declaration of Helsinki declaring everyone must receive full and fair informed consent. I think both of those are being trampled on right now. Employers, governments, other stakeholders, listen, say, take the vaccine with no question or suffer severe consequences. Macron in France today announced efforts, a campaign to actually harm the unvaccinated. He wants to do things to harm the unvaccinated. In a country in South America today, it was stated that an unvaccinated person cannot get money out of an ATM. Now, that doesn't have anything to do with COVID. You know, that person can be the only person at the ATM. They can, maintain, contagion control there. So this is mass formation with the larger group now begins to try to harm and hurt the smaller group.
Wow. Yeah, that's scary stuff. So I really hope, people, if there's one thing people take from this video, is that I think we all need to take a little bit more time looking at data ourselves and thinking critically rather than just trusting people we see on TV and our leaders. But so with that being said, Dr. McCullough, I have a question I think that might take this in a bit of a different direction you've had in some of your media interviews, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So Fluvoxamine is an anti-anxiety drug you mentioned in the Joe Rogan interview that seems to help with COVID outcomes, in certain situations. So there's a known connection between anxiety levels and immune function that indicates people suffering from consistently high levels of stress and anxiety are often more vulnerable to sickness. With that in mind, I'd like to read you just a short excerpt from a study published in the National Institute of Health in 2014 on a breathing, meditation, and cold exposure technique called the voluntary activation of the sympathetic nervous system and attenuation of the innate immune response in humans. So it goes, hitherto, both the autonomic nervous system and innate immune system were regarded as systems that cannot be voluntarily influenced. The present study demonstrates that through practicing techniques learned in a short-term training program, the sympathetic nervous system and immune system can indeed be voluntarily influenced. Healthy volunteers practicing the learned techniques exhibited profound increases in the release of epinephrine, which in turn led to increased production of anti-inflammatory mediators and subsequent dampening of the pro-inflammatory cytokine response elicited by intravenous administration of bacterial endotoxin. This study could have important implications for the treatment of a variety of conditions associated with excessive or persistent inflammation, especially autoimmune diseases in which therapies that antagonize pro-inflammatory cytokines have shown great benefit. So, Dr. McCullough, given that cytokine storms have been one of the main factors driving lung damage with coronavirus, do you think the techniques mentioned in this study could be further investigated for its use, particularly in the fight against coronavirus? And in a broader respect, do you think it's possible that there are more holistic solutions that aren't even being considered, at this point?
I think that's some really good scholarship there. We've been trying to figure out, why does fluvoxamine cause favorable outcomes in randomized high quality trials in COVID-19. A recent paper from Brazil published in Lancet, another positive randomized trial, high quality large trial. And you're right. It's either going to be some type of mind-body connection where the activation of the sympathetic nervous system is actually playing a role in the pathogenesis of the progressive COVID-19, or it may just be that the anxiety of being alone and being in isolation and trying to wait it out is so overbearing that at some point in time, people throw in the towel, they go to the hospital. Maybe fluvoxamine actually allows people to actually bear with it long enough to survive it. I've been impressed with a paper by Fillmore and colleagues from the VA that shows that 45% of people hospitalized never have an oxygen saturation less than 94%, meaning that, listen, a lot of these hospitalizations are kind of panic hospitalizations. People actually begin to panic, or family members panic. Remember, family members can't see the person who's sick, so it's all by phone or FaceTime, and relatives become excessively concerned. I've seen, even in my family circles, I've seen relatives, start to panic, and they say, listen, you need to go to the hospital. And then once somebody goes to the hospital, then they're captive in isolation. Interesting. One of the things that happens in the hospital is that there's no medication reconciliation, which is a standard process, meaning whatever they're getting as an outpatient, it's stripped away from them. So they would have the fluvoxamine taken away. They would have ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, prednisone, colchicine. They'd have all those taken away. There's actually no medication reconciliation. I mean, this is stunning. So once patients hit the hospital, things really go bad. And I wanted to point out a paper that's just been published. The first author is Karen Burns from the Academy Group, which is an evidence-based group. And the title of the paper is Adherence to Clinical Practice Guidelines for Pharmacologic Treatments in Hospitalized Patients. She concluded, this is in JAMA, she concluded that 18.8% of all protocols followed in the hospital do not provide adequate description of the risks and benefits of the treatment. She concluded that 9.4% of all these protocols that people are adhering to in the hospital, and these doctors won't move from them, actually do not have a process to have vetting or external evaluation by experts, and no commitment to updating. So patients are furious about in-hospital care. And I think many patients have been burned by a panic hospitalization, and then they're stuck in the hospital where they get a step down in care. So fluvoxamine may help them. I can tell you clinically, I've had a very good experience in using fluvoxamine in the post-COVID syndrome or long COVID syndrome, where again, it may play a role because the respiratory illness itself may have certain features where it's affected the sympathetic nervous system. In a recent paper from the National Institutes of Health published on the ResearchGate server, the first author is Chertow. Again, this is really a bombshell. 44 individuals who died of COVID-19 had autopsies, even out to 230 days after the onset of illness. And in every case, they found the virus, and the virus was everywhere. It was in the brain, the heart, the subcuticular tissues, the lymph nodes, as you pointed out, Jay, and it was alive, and the virus was replicating. And I think this paper, to me, is the biggest eye opener. No wonder people feel sick for a long time after COVID-19. No wonder people intermittently test positive and think they have 2 or 3 cases of the same variant. Now, the Omicron clearly is broken through natural immunity, but the previous more lethal variants, one clinical syndrome, but lots of intermittent testing afterwards. It's all explained. This virus is in us a lot longer than we thought, and it's alive.
Yep. That's all excellent points. Thank you. And your thoughts on that, Tim?
Well, I heard recently from a cardiologist who very well trained, Columbia Presbyterian, and he's at a very reputable hospital in New Jersey. And when he contacted me, it was mid-December, so perhaps it was pre-Omicron. But his view was that 70% of the COVID patients in his hospital were not vaccinated, that the vaccinated people are less likely to die or to be hospitalized than the unvaccinated. And I wonder if those numbers that he was finding are still the same, in light of Omicron, because I keep hearing that this is now becoming a pandemic of the vaccinated. I also wonder to what degree the numbers might be skewed by the PCR tests and the possibility of a lot of false positives.
Yeah, we have enough real world data to look at 3 basic outcomes. Getting the respiratory illness, yes or no, kind of community, COVID-19. The second outcome is hospitalization, and the third outcome is death. We have enough information to understand that. For the respiratory illness of just getting COVID-19 or not, the most contemporary data set to point to was published in JAMA, and the first author is Young Zhu, and this was published again within the last few weeks in JAMA, and it has to do with older male veteran enrollees getting COVID-19, and this is during the period of the Delta variant. It turns out that in high Delta periods of time, that the vaccine efficacy against the respiratory illness fell to 20%. It was only 20% protective. Now, the outcome of hospitalization, interestingly, we don't have any data in the Delta part of the pandemic, but pre-Delta, one of the better papers to quote is 1040 in JAMA from the Ivy network, a federally funded network. Yeah, they actually showed protection against hospitalization of 85% protection. But for mortality, I can tell you, I'll give the exact numbers for 1040 for mortality. The mortality differential is not nearly as impressive. And so we have a dilemma where the vaccines don't look very good at stopping transmission of community COVID, and they're not very good at reducing mortality, but yet they look spectacular on hospitalization. So, what would explain that? Well, it turns out that the CDC has always recommended that the unvaccinated, when they come in for a hospital encounter, that they get tested for COVID-19. And then if one is positive for COVID-19, that's counted as a COVID-19 hospitalization. Whereas the unvaccinated do not get routine testing unless they have a respiratory illness. So we're doing far more testing in the unvaccinated as they encounter the hospitals compared to the vaccinated. And so that's creating a contrived number where the hospitalization benefit looks tremendously better for the vaccinated. And then there's another important point, and this was proven in a VA paper by Cohn and colleagues. Those who take the vaccine are generally, they're healthier, and they're actually less likely to have problems. And, we have, my clinical experience is patients who take the vaccine, they're far more likely to get early treatment. Now, I know early treatment has a bigger impact on hospitalization than the virus, than the vaccine or anything else. So the vaccinated patients who took the vaccine, who are worried about themselves, they get early treatment. The sicker patients who haven't taken the vaccine and they may have less impetus to do so, have less of a proclivity to get early treatment. They end up in the hospital. Now, the bottom line really is what happens in the hospital. Let's just say people say, listen, I'll take my chances with the hospital. What happens in the hospital? And the 1040 paper actually gives us a lot of insight. And let me give you the data there, because I think it's impressive. Because people have said, listen, what is the bottom line? President Biden said that it's going to be a very dark winter for those people who don't take the vaccine. So, the 1040 paper from the Ivy network is is a government-sponsored study. And so let me get to it here, because I think it's important.
And while you're pulling that up, Dr. McCullough, I think, Tim, if you've ever heard of someone by the name of Steve Kirsch, he does a really good job at talking about the mortality data of the end game. And I think that what we need to remember is that the overwhelming majority of people who get infected don't wind up getting hospitalized. So what I think one of one of the things I think Dr. McCullough is getting at is while the vaccine may be effective somewhat at preventing some hospitalizations in people, the overall rate of hospitalization is going to be low. So if your chance of hospitalization with the vaccine is say 0.5%, but without the vaccine it's 1%, technically they can go on the news and say the vaccine, makes you, much less likely to be hospitalized by COVID, even though the actual reduction of risk is only about 0.5%. So I know I have the numbers all like wrong there, but like that's the general that was one of the things you were getting at, right, Dr. McCullough?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it's impossible for the vaccine to be pretty unimpressive on community spread and binary respiratory illness and be relatively unimpressive on mortality, but have a huge impact on hospitalization. It's impossible to do. I'm telling you, the hospitalization data are contrived, and they're contrived, and that's what Jay was pointing to, by differential testing in the hospital. So here's the 1040 papers, Mark 1040. It was published, it's the IV Network, a federally funded JAMA, November 4th. Fact checkers, please pull this paper. And there, among the fully vaccinated individuals, the rate of death in the hospital with COVID-19, 6.3%. The rate of death in unvaccinated people in the hospital, 8.6%. So there is now the p-value is 0.36. It's not statistically significant. So what I'm telling you is, yes, there is numerically a lower mortality rate, but it's not huge. And this idea that the hospitals are full of unvaccinated people I think it's contrived. I think it's contrived by differential testing, and the fact that somebody comes in with a headache and they test positive for COVID, they get put in isolation, and the same person comes in for a headache with who's vaccinated, they'll probably get treated with for a migraine headache and get sent home. So I think differential testing is driving a lot of it.
I also noticed the CDC's new definition of vaccinated. So you have been vaccinated for less than 14 days, you're not vaccinated. I wonder if that makes a difference. I'm wondering, Dr. McCullough, what you make of the argument that it's the unvaxxed that are leading to further mutations and new variants in the virus.
Well, we have two periods of time to look at. We had the pre-vaccination era, so we can't blame vaxxed or unvaxxed before the vaccines came out. That should be self-apparent. And so we've always had a blend of variants. Do you know there's probably a couple thousand variants overall, and they're divided into variants of interest, VOI, and then variants of concern when they start to pick up some more frequency and virulence. And this is all published in the UK weekly public health service report. So it's great to see it. So prior to the vaccine program, we had a blend of variants, but we did not have a hyper-dominant strain. And then once we introduced vaccination, two papers, one by Neeson, one by Arcevedo, clearly showed you get to 25% population vaccinated, we will allow a dominant strain to move forward and dominate the pandemic. And that's exactly what happened with Delta. That's what happened with Delta. And now, so Delta, it's clear, most experts agree, it arose because of mass vaccination. And now with the Omicron outbreak, it's clear Omicron is actually discovered among the fully vaccinated traveling across the border of Botswana. So it's clear the vaccinated are leading to hyper-dominant mutant strains, not the unvaccinated. And in some countries, there's very few unvaccinated people left. There was a report out of Germany that over 90% of people with COVID-19 were fully vaccinated. So we you just can't look for people to blame. Today, Boris Johnson said that we have a crisis of the unboosted. So pretty soon it's going to be turning the eye towards the unboosted. The unvaccinated will be off the hook because there's too few of them, and they'll need to blame some other group.
Yep. And to build on that point, Dr. Malone, I follow him on on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I noticed he posted a screenshot of some data coming out of Denmark. And what that seemed to indicate to me is that there's a direct positive correlation between number of shots that someone received and their likelihood of catching Delta. So not catching Delta, catching Omicron. So it almost seems like, and that was another question I had for you, Dr. McCullough. That's a good transition. The last time you were on my show, I had asked you about the possibility of vaccine-enhanced disease, and you let me know at that time that there was no evidence for it. Given some of the more recent developments that we've seen coming out, do you think that it's possible that people, that we are seeing more signs of, vaccine-enhanced disease at this point?
I don't see it. I have to tell you, it's called antibody-dependent enhancement or vaccine-enhanced disease. We would have to postulate that taking a vaccine causes more virulent disease. And, I reviewed some of the mortality data. It is slightly in favor of receiving a vaccine. In my clinical practice, I've seen probably in the last few weeks, I've even picked up 100 Omicron cases of experience. It's pretty mild. How Omicron is broken through natural immunity. The people who do the best are those who are naturally immune. Somebody who had alpha, beta, gamma, Delta, and then they get Omicron. It literally is an hour or two of a very mild fever, maybe some nasal congestion. It is basically wiped out with some nasal washes with dilute povidone iodine, 1 to 10 dilution from the 10% solution, or a 1 to 3 dilution of hydrogen peroxide. Just squirt it back in the nose, sniff it back and spit it out. It just basically kills the virus. The Omicron virus replicates 70 times faster than Omicron, and it basically just spins up in the nasal passages. We did find out from a paper from Khan and colleagues that Omicron closes the immunologic door on Delta. So people who get Omicron get back immunity against Delta. And I say good riddance, because Delta was a hard pandemic. It was hard to treat. Our Nowcast, CDC Nowcast feature, which is a really good feature, they use modeling and they're pretty accurate. They indicate as of January 4th, it's anticipated, once we have all the sequencing data in, they anticipate, by the way, that we're at 93% Omicron in the United States. That's a whole new day. So we have all the previously immune getting no Omicron, very mild self-limited syndrome. Virtually no one requires treatment. We have the fully vaccinated getting Omicron. My clinical experiences there is some seniors, some elderly people do need some treatment to get through the illness. Most of the time, just some oral drugs. I've had one case that I was worried enough, I used sotorivimab, which is the GSK monoclonal antibody, the one that actually is designed to treat the resistant strains. And then the group that actually does the worst with Omicron is the unvaccinated, who are COVID naive, where they're just in that camp where they haven't been exposed before. And it can be a little rougher time for them. But I have to tell you, great news. We have data from Abdullah et al., South Africa, with Omicron. They have inpatient mortality down to 1%. 1%. Wow. I showed you the data from 1040, and they don't give early treatment there. So I can tell you, if we have early treatment, United States, our Omicron mortality is going to be less than 1%. It's a different ball game. This is outpatient management. We've got the Pfizer drug coming, the Merck drug coming. We're going to be able to handle this as an outpatient. It's not going to be a crisis.
Yeah, and it sounds like, as you pointed out a few times on this podcast, and we're all seeing now, Omicron is the equivalent, to a cold. It's the same symptoms, and, we're moving past it. So hopefully, with the combination of the early outpatient treatments, you've been speaking about from the start, and the fact that severity is so much worse, it seems like there are actually beginning to be some cracks, like in the mainstream narrative that's been pushed these past 2 years. And I didn't realize Boris Johnson made that announcement, because it's interesting, because I also read from them earlier today that they're not likely to bring back any of the lockdown restrictions, like that, or they're not likely to renew them, I believe. So I think for now they seem to be ditching the idea, like of the vaccine passport for now. But who knows what the future holds as far as that goes. So with that being said, I did want to mention one last thing that I heard on the podcast that between you and Dr. Malone and the gentleman who introduced the concept of mass formation. You guys mentioned the fact that if the mass formation focus actually turns to the heart of the problem, that may also be another way to kind of divert it in a more productive way. So I believe Dr. Malone had mentioned one of the more disturbing trends is, the fact that most governments across the world seem to be far more susceptible to like corporate capture than the average person like realizes. And I think as far as like getting people to refocus, like on the bigger threats to society, meaning like the overreach of the institutions that we've given power to. Like, what do you think? Have you seen any, good strategies in helping that, assisting in that refocus? And is there anything that you found has been the best way to kind of wake people up? Like, I'm trying to put it in a more formal way, but I kind of like, what's the best way to get people to really wake up and realize that things are not as they seem on the surface, and we can't really trust the institutions the way we thought we could before? What do you think the best way to get people to see that is?
And can I build on that question just a tad? Because I keep hearing from a lot of folks that they're trusting the science, and they'll trust the world's leading virologists and immunologists and epidemiologists, and therefore they don't, case closed, no discussion, that's it. Just in the last hour here, listening to you, Dr. McCullough, it's clear you've read so widely. You have mastered the science. You have immersed yourself in it. And yet you keep hearing this refrain. And because you're not in Anthony Fauci's position, you're not at the FDA or the CDC, and you're not on mainstream media for the most part. Now and then, I get it, Fox, but that'll play into a lot of people's biases. If it's on Fox, I don't want to watch it. So you're in their eyes, they're not going to even listen to somebody so learned as you, and they're going to keep saying they're trusting that the world's leading experts. How do you break through this?
I had dinner with Scott Atlas about a month ago, and just at the day he released his new book about being on the task force in the White House, and he got an inside look. And I asked Scott that question too. I said, what are these CDC and NIH officials completely incompetent? He says they actually don't look at data. They actually don't know the things that we've talked about. They themselves don't know. And he says they're not reading any reports. They're not doing any research. They are literally showing up to meetings, giving talking points, and then getting lathered up about what's the next media appearance that they have.
Wow.
He said that really is, and when poor Scott, he said, he goes, I did everything Peter McCullough would do. I studied all the papers and I had the data. And, Scott had concluded that, lockdowns weren't going to work, and correctly so. And, they basically just had their talking points. No, wear a mask, stay locked down, get ready for the vaccines. And that's what it was. So he thinks it's a crisis of incompetence. We still don't have leaders on TV from those stakeholders that even have ever treated a COVID patient. They've never even seen COVID. How can they opine about COVID-19? There was been some Senate hearings asking CDC officials saying, listen, when are you going to get back in the office? When are you going to get off of WebEx and start meeting? How can people at the CDC review data and see each other's body language? What are they thinking about when they review 21,000 deaths after the vaccine? What do they think about when they reviewed 200 cases of myocarditis in June, and now they've got 21,000 cases of myocarditis? What are they thinking about? How did their meetings go? I mean, this is like myocarditis. This is something the FDA says the vaccines cause myocarditis. This is not controversial. The CDC is logging these cases. In fact, they're actually calling to make sure they have myocarditis. I know because I've reported them. The CDC is called. So, I mean, how do their meetings go? How does this happen? I'd love to be a fly on the wall. I guess I can accept incompetence to a certain extent and lack of clinical experience and all of this. But at some point in time, America needs to know the scoop. What is in their minds? This is all going to come out. How are they going to explain this in the end? This will come out. And by the way, this is not a matter of education. The public knows about this. The rates of vaccination in the United States plummeted in April, plummeted. Nobody wanted to take these vaccines. And then we saw these gross inducements like, have a beer, have a donut, $1 million raffle, a free college scholarship. No one would take it. A free trip to a brothel in Europe. Guys wouldn't do it. I'm telling you, basically it was obvious. People were talking to each other. They knew the vaccines were unsafe.
So they had to resort to mandates and threats.
Their mandates and threats. Well, believe me, it's not a matter of education. It's not like, oh, the public just needs to know the vaccines are dangerous. They know they're dangerous. That's the reason why they don't want to take the vaccines. That's the reason why there's been very little uptake of boosters. I see patients all day long. The vaccines have created more clinical conundrums than you can imagine. I had somebody today, a young man, he's married. He felt his marriage was going to fall apart because his wife wanted him to take the vaccine. He didn't. He took the vaccine anyway, and then he developed some chest pain and arm pain. And now we're trying to evaluate for myocarditis. I had another couple that both took the vaccines back in April, and now they're trying to conceive, and they're not conceiving, and they're going to go to a fertility specialist. And, obviously this is, people have had fertility problems before the COVID-19 vaccines. But what I'm saying is this brings in a whole new era of medical problems, and we are loaded. There's been 1 million people with certified vaccine injuries, 1 million. This is a brand new disease category. We have 36,000 people who are permanently disabled. Permanently disabled.
What gets me is decades ago, you would have had an uproar in the United States Congress. And here you hardly hear a peep. When you do, it's dismissed as some kind of a partisan right-wing agenda. And it suggests that much of Congress has been captured by the big pharma industry, just the way the FDA and the CDC has.
But I'm not totally buying into the big pharma thing. I had a chance to interview Prasad Bushnell, who is a lead attorney suing India in the Supreme Court of India, because in India, there's been no transparency whatsoever, none. They won't even tell what vaccines did anything. They're just telling people to take a vaccine, and he's outraged. And there, the major vaccine is Sinovac, a Chinese company. So I just want to get the numbers straight for your listeners. I pulled up the December 24th VAERS report. These are certified cases, 21,002 deaths. There are 35,650 permanently disabled and 22,117 myocarditis. This is worse than a war. It will come out. And you know what, Jay and Tim, I had some insight when I went to Baton Rouge. And I met with Dr. Diane Andrews she's quite a lady, a business lady, healthcare leader, really a civil and social leader. She reminded me of the Tuskegee experiment, Tuskegee program. And, from 1932 to 1972, the CDC and the Public Health Service ran a program, recruited men with and without syphilis, gave them basically placebo type supplements to say it's going to prevent syphilis. They didn't tell the men their status. They followed them year by year. 1944, penicillin becomes available, widely available in 1948. The CDC actively suppresses penicillin to these African-American men, actively suppresses. They give syphilis to their spouses, their girlfriends, their progeny. This goes all the way to 1972, and heads start to roll. There's outrage with oversight committees. A few people at the CDC get fired. The CDC still doesn't apologize. And then finally, it takes Bill Clinton in 1994 to formally apologize to the family and their progeny and offer reparations. And so what Diane Andrews told me, she goes, the CDC is running the U.S. COVID-19 vaccine program. She goes, they're not going to apologize.
Right.
Listen, it's the same organization. It's the same mentality that ran Tuskegee. This is Tuskegee on a massive scale.
Right. Your point about India and the fact that it's the Sinovac and it's not big pharma. To me, I thought of Catherine Austin Fitts. I don't know if either of you have had a chance to listen to her, former HUD deputy secretary, a former Wall Street investment banker, who says the point of the vaccines are the vaccines certificates. It's to get everybody sort of registered into the system for a social credit system.
Right.
Now, what they're really trying to impose is a type of social control, a type of tyranny on a global scale that we've never seen before. And you know, this fits into the Great Reset of what the World Economic Forum has been pushing.
But you know, I have to say, Tim, my only problem with I know I've talked to Whitney Webb about this, and she also has written greatly about this. She actually wrote about this at the very onset of the pandemic, actually, before the vaccine. She said, listen, this whole coronavirus, this is an opportunity for the social credit system and create a vaccine at Lincoln. She has some great articles showing this. And the bottom line is that the difficulty I have with that is, why make the vaccine so toxic? Why make the vaccine something you're going to die from? If they want people doing a social credit system, they don't want them to die of the vaccine. They don't want them to be crippled with a vaccine. So why make the vaccine so toxic if this is about a social credit system? That my same comment would be about trackers. People say, well, this is about tracking and nano trackers. I said, listen, if you just want to track somebody, inject some saline with the tracker in it. If you want a social credit system, just inject somebody and have a good, a barcode system. You know, these vaccine cards don't even have any credible barcode system. There's no magnetic, you get more tracking running a 5K race than you do getting a vaccine. These vaccine cards are really a joke as terms of information technology.
So who benefits then from having a toxic vaccine? To some degree, does Big Pharma, because they are now going to be selling all kinds of medications to deal with the chronic diseases that result from it? Or is it something even more nefarious in the age of artificial intelligence? They don't need human beings on a mass scale anymore. They can have robots to do all of our jobs better than we do.
The one thing that's clear, the one thing that's clear though, it's a mass vaccination program for every person in the world at the same time, promoted by all the heads of government. They have all the heads of the churches. They have they have everybody at the top, and it doesn't matter what vaccine it is. That's the most interesting thing. Even in the United States, it's like, take a vaccine, take any vaccine. And it's like, really? So that gets back to mass formation. That's the ridiculousness of it. If it's about COVID, there must be the best vaccine. Why don't we all take the best vaccine? But no, just listen, we don't even care which one it is.
I get what you're saying, Dr. McCullough, and on that specific point, if you actually look at some of the major shareholders, and not just, like these drug companies, but also like the media companies too, you are actually seeing a bit of a pattern. There are different private equity funds, and fund management firms that you see that are major share owners in these different corporations. So maybe it's not all big pharma, but really a conglomerate like different people. Like, I don't know, I think that could be part of it too. That's just my opinion, but either way, I think the most important focus at least, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but in my opinion, I think the first thing we need to figure out is how to protect public health now and, correct some of the damage, that's been done. Then we need to figure out how do we move forward. But I do think, it's important that we do follow some of the money trails, like after this is all said and done, to really figure that out after. But I agree with you, Tim, too, that I think that it does seem like there's some connections between Big Pharma, Congress, and the media that haven't really been explored by a lot of people. So,
hey Jay, I have to read a quick write up about a CNN release today, and ask Tim his response. So this is written up by Tyler Durden, CNN Network Today. The network wheeled out Professor Bioethics Arthur Kaplan, who called for a raft of extreme actions to be taken against the unvaccinated, including denying them the right to buy affordable health medical insurance and increasing hospital bills on them.
Wow. I mean,
it is amazing. Over the last 2 years now, we've seen such an erosion of our basic freedoms on the bill. Almost every part of the Bill of Rights seems to be shredded at this point. Of course, the First Amendment with all of the widespread censorship. The Fourth Amendment, which protects against search and seizures that are not reasonable, and we have all kinds of contact tracing. The Fifth Amendment, which requires that when the government takes private property, it provides just compensation. Well, when the government had its massive shutdowns in 2020, it bankrupted 1 out of 5 small businesses, many of them minority-owned small businesses, and there was nothing resembling just compensation whatsoever. So this, when you talk about the kind of discrimination that's being rolled out and suggested against the unvaccinated, it really kind of fits into the 10 stages of genocide. And I would urge folks to go and look that up online. And, singling out specific group or groups to be discriminated against is one of those stages. And I think what we see happening in Australia, the reports of actual camps to detain vaccinated, yeah, it's beyond troubling.
For me, the most interesting thing about the Australia newsreels is that they're walking into the camps.
Yeah.
They're not being dragged in. It almost reminds me of people walking to the gas chambers. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
This idea of, where's the sense of, wait a minute, something's going wrong here. My life is being disturbed. I'm being put into a vaccine camp. I mean, this is, you can't make this stuff up. It's absolutely striking. A bioethics expert is basically waging asymmetric warfare against people's health because of a personal medical choice on a vaccine that is not very effective and clearly not safe.
Well, you could look at experts in U.S. constitutional law at elite universities who seem to be completely untroubled by vaccination mandates, and they have to refer to a 1905 Supreme Court decision upholding a state legislative act, not executive edicts, and state legislative act where the fine for not complying was $5, what would be the equivalent today of $155. And really, you've got elite legal experts, constitutional law experts who are just going along with this. It makes me wonder what kind of world we're living in, what has happened. And the mass formation, I mean, I guess anybody is susceptible to it, even highly educated people who have devoted their lives to defending individual liberties and freedoms.
And on that specific point, you guys, when you were speaking about mass formation with you, Dr. Malone, and Dr. Desmet, I'm sorry, that's his name, right? The doctor, I'm sorry, but when the three of you guys were discussing how it's possible that so many doctors, have become susceptible, to this mass formation phenomenon, you guys had mentioned that one of the possible driving factors could be that desire, for social status, and going against the grain, that has already been decided, does put that social status at risk. And as Dr. Malone mentioned, some people who, in my opinion, I'm a very spiritual person. I believe I have a close connection with God. I know, you're also a religious person too, Dr. McCullough. Do you think possibly, encouraging people to really look at their motivations, behind their decisions could be one of the best ways out of this too? Because I think we all need to do some internal reflection, in this whole situation.
I've done a check with people on my side of the argument, and we've asked ourselves, are we crazy? We estimate there's only 500 doctors in the United States who know what's going on. There's 1 million doctors in the mass formation. So what we asked ourselves, could we be wrong? And so we said, well, what did we really do wrong here? Well, I was basically on a mission to treat as many people as I could who had a potentially fatal illness. And I used a range of drugs, including the EUA monoclonal antibodies and over-the-counter drugs that really were all completely ineffective.
Wow.
Okay, so I'm guilty of over treating patients with everything being ineffective, including monoclonal antibodies. Okay. And the other thing is, I was excessively concerned over a perfectly safe and effective review to you right in the VAERS report is just basically the way it rolled out. It just was absolutely not at all due to the vaccine. And that all the injuries I'm seeing in the clinic and all the hardship I'm hearing about, it's just not related. And that I was just excessively concerned over a perfectly safe and effective vaccine. And so, you know, if I look at it that way, even if I did commit those errors are pretty small, right? They're pretty small. Now, what if we're right? What if we're right? Oh my Lord, we have basically just witnessed the largest genocide of our times, and it's going strong. It's going strong. We had in the United States 800,000 lives lost, 85% could have been saved, multiple experts. The vaccine, the recent paper that came out by Pantazatos from Colombia, using census data and vaccine administrative data, you know, they have the number of real American lives lost with the vaccine over 170,000. Over 170,000. That means, because with COVID-19 respiratory illness, the CDC tells us that 90% basically have another life-ending disease as well. That means we only have 60 people who really died of COVID-19 and respiratory illness. But with the vaccine, they obviously, you know, they took the vaccine. There's nothing else there to blame. That in fact, more people have died with the vaccine than the respiratory illness. And that's exactly what the analysis by Ron Kostoff has shown. The Kostoff analysis shows more people will die of the vaccine than taking the chances with the respiratory illness. And so the data are cohesive from a variety of sources. The bigger menace is actually the vaccine. And so I've publicly called to drop all the vaccine mandates, drop them. And we need to pause Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and do a deep dive on safety review. And if we have to frontline the Novavax for a high-risk senior booster program, or look at Covaxin or the others, you know, bring them in. But the bottom line is the genetic vaccines have to be taken down. They will continue to do more harm until we stop them.
If you were wrong, and folks like you and Dr. Malone and Robert Kennedy and others were wrong, they would not have to censor you and smear you. They would be able to have an honest, open discussion and debate and to disprove you. It's the fact that they have responded by shredding the First Amendment, by censorship, thank you, is a real indication that they cannot defend their position in a rational, reasoned way.
And Dr. McCullough, you even mentioned that, I believe, on Dr. Rogan, on Joe Rogan, one of the reasons why you keep going and that you're positive is because you believe the truth, you know, will win out. And I agree with that 100%. So I agree. I think that you can only suppress the truth for so long, and what's in the dark does wind up coming to light a lot of the time. So
you remember that movie with Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson? Yep. You want the truth. You can't handle the truth. And I have to tell you, the truth is powerful. That's the reason why no one will come to the table and discuss vaccine safety and efficacy. That's the reason why no one will come to the table and make the case that we should not treat COVID patients and let them get slaughtered by the virus. They know they're wrong. People say, Dr. McCullough, have you ever been challenged by it? I said, never. No one's actually ever even discussed it with me. They don't have the courage. So the only thing we have is sniping, little sniping from the side, little, you know, little things, acts of censorship. The fact checkers have been fact checking. They're spewing lies, basically. They've been proven to spew lies. And not only that, but they get quickly traced back to the vaccine stakeholders. So it's very obvious. Everything's in the open. So the fact checkers have been fact checked. They basically easily trace back to the vaccine stakeholders. It's about conflict of interest. It is about people basically on an agenda right now. And the question is, how big and strong is that small group going to be to ultimately win the day? Those in the formation are not going to save us. It's really those outside the formation.
Yep. And I think the formation is starting to crack. I could be wrong, but even people I know who were previously a lot more excited about the shots, are starting to come around a little bit more and noticing a little bit more of the hypocrisy. So I just want to take a moment to again thank you for all the the hard work you've done in bringing the truth to light. And I know it takes longer than we would all hope, but I do have a positive mindset that the truth will win out too. So I believe it's starting to crack right now. And your appointment to this independent review board, I do think that's a really good sign of things to come. So hopefully the tide is starting to shift with 2022, and this new year is bringing some new approaches to handling this pandemic too. So we'll see how it plays out.
And I'd like to thank Jay for having me on, and to echo what he said. I've got such great respect for you, Dr. McCullough. Keep up the great work, and thank you for everything you're doing.
And I've learned a lot too. Yes.
Thank both of you. Great program. And, I think it's really great, Jay, to bring on different people, different viewpoints. I love kind of the legal, medical side of that, because those are two big dimensions. And let's keep it going. We're making great progress.
Definitely. Thank you. And I'm actually going to be investing a lot more in this channel, doing more frequent updates on myself. So on that note, if the viewers of this, if you guys enjoyed this video, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Make sure that you hit the notification button so you can be up to date when all these videos come out. You'll be able to find Tim Canova's contact information with his social media links in the description, as well as Dr. McCullough's and the link to his website, America Out Loud. You guys should really check that out. And right before I end it, I just want to take a moment to point out that we're shooting this on January 6th, a year since the incident, in the Capitol. And I think this should be a time for healing for everyone. And I think we need to stop blowing things out of proportion and realize that all people in general, especially like here in America, we have a lot more in common than we realize. And let's start to establish the facts on the ground and really talk about common reality. And even if we have political disagreements, which I'm sure if we went down the line, maybe we agree on 3 or 4% of things and the rest we agree on, let's focus on what we agree on and move forward from there. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to be part of this. And I look forward to bringing both of you guys back on, in different, for different shows later down the road. But thank you so much for your time. All right.
Okay. Thanks, Jay.
All right. Bye.